Good morning, honorable members. Good morning, honorable members and guests, and this morning, and thank you for coming to this meeting. When we will be having presentations done by two organizations that are doing great work in communities, in a sector that is, as one of the reports that I read that were shared with us said, that there is war waged against women in this country through gender-based violence and femicide. So I would like to welcome all of you, and I look forward to the presentations that you will be doing to us, for us, or before us, and that we can use your presentations as we do our oversight work over the Department of Social Development and its entities. My name is Bridget Masango, and I am the chairperson of this portfolio committee in the 7th Parliament. And I don't know if it's going to work for us if I ask members of the portfolio committee to introduce themselves, just so that our guests and our presenters will know who is in this portfolio committee as they do their presentations. Before all that happens, I would like for us to just take one moment of silence for prayer and meditation. Thank you. Thank you so much. At this time, I would like for us to, for members or honorable members of this portfolio committee to please introduce themselves. If you are in an area where they say the bandwidth is not that strong, if you could please just show your face and then switch off your camera again, so that we do not lose you, but just for the benefit of our guests to this meeting. You can start, Honorable, I can see Honorable Reverend Kobaza, you can start, sir. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. Royal greeting to everyone. I am Reverend Kobaza from Umkhonto Wesizwe Party. Thank you.
You can go
Good
ahead,
morning.
Pato.
Good morning, Chairperson. My name is Alexandra Abrams from the Democratic Alliance.
Recording in progress.
Good morning, Chairperson. My name is
Honorable Mare, we couldn't hear you, but the honorable member who was just trying to introduce herself is Honorable Paulnita Mare, who is the member of this portfolio committee. You can go ahead, Honorable Mtsweni.
Good morning, Chairperson. I'm Honorable Mtsweni from MK. I'm new in this committee. Thank you for welcoming me.
You are most welcome, Honorable Mtsweni. We welcomed you in your absence last week, but it is great to put the face to the name. You are most welcome to the committee. We can go ahead, honorable members.
Good morning, Chair. Honorable Christina Tong from the ANC.
Thank you, Honorable Tong. You are welcome. Any other member who is with us today? It does not seem so, at which point I will anyway hand over this meeting to our acting committee secretary to take us through the agenda, the apologies, and so on and so forth. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Chairperson.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Chairperson and honorable members. My name is Lwazi Ben. I'll be the acting committee secretary today. On our agenda this morning, Chairperson, we will be having a briefing by the National Shelter Movement for South Africa and by the Gauteng Care Crisis Centre. Chairperson, I have not received any apologies at the current moment, Chairperson. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Acting Secretary, for that. We will obviously record apologies as we receive them, but I would like to table this agenda to the Honourable Chairpersons for adoption, please. Honourable
Morning, Chairperson. I adopt the agenda for today.
Thank you so much, Honourable Member. And anyone to second Honourable Makgatho for us?
Thank you, Chairperson. I will second this as
Thank you, Honourable Mare. The agenda as having been adopted without any changes and seconded, I believe that this is time when we will now start with our meeting or presentations rather, because the meeting is already on. And at this time, I would like to hand over, welcome and greet and hand over to the National Shelter Movement for South Africa on the funding, resourcing, and compliance to norms and standards of NPOs in South Africa. In handing over to you, I also wish to again thank you for the work that you are doing. The documents that you sent us made for quite eye-opening reading, and just to imagine the work that you are doing on the ground and the impact that you are making in the lives of South Africans that are in need of your services, and also the fact that you seem to be moving a needle on the scourge that is facing us as a country. And so your work is appreciated, and we are hoping that your presentation today will trigger oversight mechanisms on our part to support the work that you are doing. As I was reading the reports that you shared with us, one of the reports said that the policy and budget of which ended in 2018, I believe, it needs to be reviewed and needs some work to be done on it. I have to be very honest with you. I was not able to find a subsequent policy and budget on sheltering in South Africa. So if colleagues do have that document, if they could please share among us, failing which we would ask the National Shelter Movement to please let us have that document and accept my apology in that regard, because I should have it as a member of the Portfolio Committee on Social Development. So I will hand over. I do not have the names of the people that will be presenting to us. So I will just hand over to the National Shelter Movement of South Africa to take over the meeting for now. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everybody. Can I be given access to share the screen, honorable members? Firstly, good morning, and I thank you for the opportunity for the National Shelter Movement to be presenting to the Portfolio Committee of the National Department of Social Development. And I'd like access to this, to sharing my screen to be able to go through the presentation.
Acting Secretary, could you please allow Ms. Zubaydah to share her documents, please? Thanks.
She has been given co-host rights, Chairperson.
Thank you so much. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. So I was asked to present to the Portfolio Committee on the overview of the National Shelter Movement of South Africa, its programs, services, and challenges experienced by the organizations and the shelters that we represent. So I'm going to take you through a very brief background on information on shelters, the brief history of the National Shelter Movement of South Africa, referred to as the NSMSA, its vision, mission, goals, the governance structure, as well as what do shelters offer gender-based violence survivors, then the activities of the NSMSA, its programs, services, and some highlights of the research that has been conducted, and the challenges both on a non-financial and financial level, and then in particular a focus on the Gauteng funding crisis, which a colleague of mine who is a task team member of the Gauteng Crisis Committee will actually present as she works with me here at the NSM and the NISA Institute, and finally a conclusion. So basically, shelters play...
I am so sorry.
Okay,
I am so sorry. May I please ask that you introduce yourself, just
Sure.
for the benefit of all the people in the platform. Thank you so much.
So my name is, I'm Dr. Zubaydah Dango from the National Shelter Movement of South Africa. I'm the executive head of the organization, and I also am the executive director of the NISA Institute for Women's Development. So I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the background of sheltering. Shelters play a fundamentally important role in responding to and addressing gender-based violence and femicide. They offer safe accommodation, provide women with opportunities for healing and rebuilding their self-worth. Very importantly, shelters play a significant role in interrupting the cycle of violence and preventing femicide. To render shelter services requires significant expertise, care, and resources, but shelters are often undervalued, with those rendering these services often facing precarious challenges. Currently, there's no legislative provision for the regulation of shelters for gender-based violence and the services they provide. A brief history of the National Shelter Movement. It's a non-profit, non-government organization which was established in 2008 at a conference nationally. It serves an umbrella body of 100 shelters in 9 provinces of South Africa, and these shelters are affiliated to the NSM-SA. The NSM focuses on the enhancement and effectiveness of shelter services for women and their children through shelters in the 9 provinces. The NISA Institute for Women's Development acts as its secretariat. The vision of the National Shelter Movement is a society where women and children are free and safe from gender-based violence. Its mission is the united voice on sheltering of women survivors of gender-based violence and their children in South Africa. So the goals of the organization are advocacy and lobbying for the rights of abused women and their children in shelters, to establish provincial shelter network forums for shelters, to ensure gender sensitivity, effective, efficient service delivery to women and children in shelters using a survivor-centric approach, to develop the capacity of shelters and service providers on gender-based violence, to engage in legislation, gender-based violence and sheltering in South Africa, to conduct research on gender-based violence and sheltering, to offer space in terms of mutual support, partnerships and networking, shared experiencing, and to conduct exchange visits and networking between shelters at a local, regional, national, and international level. We conduct a sheltering helpline, and we conduct a series of monthly webinars and an annual national indaba in partnership with the National Department of Social Development. So in terms of our governance structure, you can see that we have 9 members here that are on our board. We have an extremely active and dynamic board at the National Shelter Movement. We've just recently completed our indaba, and we had a quorum at the indaba, which is really unusual, for NGO shelters. Then the executive, I'm the head, and then we have 2 executives, Bernadine Bacher and Rosaline Bailey. Advocate Bernadine Bacher is from the Saki Bartman Centre in Cape Town, and Rosaline Bailey is from the Northern Cape. Then that followed by the Secretariat based in Johannesburg, and we have these members of staff that are at the Secretariat. We are then represented by provincial reps in each of the provinces. In Port Elizabeth, we have Gary Kukamur. In the Free State, Sarah Lekali. In Gauteng, Lisha Stevens. In KwaZulu-Natal, Nadia Munsami. In Limpopo, Nabasutu Javu. And in Mpumalanga, we have 2 reps, Sindiswa Masimango and Sidi Matole, and Rosaline Bailey in the Northern Cape. And then at the Shelter Helpline, which is also based in Johannesburg, we have Zandi Mzungu, Faith Ramaboko, Tina Mahidela, Rumeisa Desai, Lirato Lillian Marudu, and Losha Mokhali. So this is the setup in terms of the governance of the National Shelter Movement. So what do shelters offer survivors of violence? And I thought that this was important to raise because recently people gave me an impression that they felt that shelters were merely places that accommodate women and children. So basically, shelters offer a critical point of crisis intervention. They provide safe accommodation with 3 nutritious meals per day. They offer space for healing, emotional containment, rebuilding of women and children's self-worth, as well as personal empowerment. They provide access to health care. Legal and psychosocial support is also provided. Assistance with ID applications. They empower women with a variety of economic skills and development. They try to provide alternative housing post-shelter, but this is often difficult because second stage housing is very limitedly available in South Africa, and third stage housing is really not available yet. They provide access to childcare, either formally or informally, and they offer schooling and educational trips for children, preparation for employment, interviews, as well as CV writing. Now, what I must say is that most shelters try to do all of these things. Many of them don't manage everything, depending on the kind of resourcing that the shelter receives from their provincial governments. So in summary, the activities and programs and services of the NSM, we established a forum for provincial representatives in the 9 provinces. We offer capacity building of shelter staff and their beneficiaries. We engage in legislation affecting gender-based violence and sheltering. We conduct research on sheltering and gender-based violence, networking, partnership development, exchange visits, locally, nationally, and we haven't yet done internationally, but when that is possible, we will do so, although we do work with shelters internationally. We engage in legislation on sheltering and gender-based violence. Sorry, that's a repeat. And then we conduct a 24-hour helpline. The helpline is not a counseling line. The helpline places women in shelters because we found that women often struggle to get to shelters. So from the time of COVID, we were supported by Uber in the 4 provinces in which they exist to transport women to shelters, and that relationship continues till today. We conduct a series of monthly webinars on gender-based violence and sheltering to ensure that we continually raise awareness on the issue. And of course, we do media, marketing, and mentoring of shelters as well. We conduct an annual national shelter in Indaba. We've just completed the 4th national shelter in Indaba on the 16th and 17th of October. So the NSM highlights of its work, we've partnered with the Heinrich Böll Foundation on a research project entitled Working to Enhance State Responsiveness to Gender-Based Violence, Paying the True Cost for a period of 3 years. The research was completed at the end of 2018 on shelters in 6 provinces and was supported by the European Union. The NSMSA conducted a costing research project with shelters entitled What is Rightfully Due? The Costing Operations of Shelters. And this research was actually shared with the Department of Social Development. The NSMSA also presented research at the Commission for Gender Equality on their hearings in 2019. From 2019 to 2021, research in the 9 provinces was conducted entitled Raising Women's Voices in South African Shelters, which was funded by the National Department of Social Development. We wanted to hear from women who were at shelters in terms of what their experiences were and how it was that we could actually ensure that we provide greater excellence in services to them. We also are a member of the Gauteng Crisis Care Committee who are presenting here today in terms of the SLAs in Gauteng. So the NSMSA engaged in advocacy. One of the things that we've done is we protested outside Parliament on the issue of inadequate funding and this was already in July 2019. We wrote an open letter to President Ramaphosa on the late funding that was received by shelters during COVID, particularly in the Eastern Cape. We've conducted a petition which received 62,272 signatures for the removal of the then Minister Becky Cele on the issue of the Krugersdorp women doing the music photo shoot where they were raped. The minister at the time said that the one woman who was raped by one man was lucky enough. And I think that this is completely unacceptable at the level of minister if you want to understand the issues of gender-based violence. The NSMSA has conducted several capacity building sessions with the representatives as a way of contributing to shelter development. So in the last year, 2023, we conducted 16 different capacity building sessions for shelters. And the capacity building was based on a questionnaire that was sent out to shelters in terms of what they thought the burning issues were and what information they felt they needed from NSMSA as a help. The helpline is a 24-hour helpline for women and their children affected by gender-based violence. It places women at clients at shelters, and it also assists women with policing and protection orders. We've written several submissions to Parliament on the various bills. So I want to just refer briefly to some of the outcomes of the research that was conducted in conjunction with the Heinrich Böll Foundation. I acknowledge that the research was completed in 2018, so it is slightly dated. However, many of the key factors that came up from the research are still quite relevant today in terms of sheltering. So the women that were involved in the research were aged 26 to 35 years. And we found that most women in shelters had limited educational opportunities. Very few of them received maintenance. So basically, most of these women were unemployed. Women needed safety and basic provisions. Women arrived at shelters with the clothes they were wearing, or sometimes with absolutely nothing, barefooted. And this happened particularly in cases where women's lives were endangered. They needed psychosocial support and care. Shelters struggle with staff capacity building, and so they're not able to always provide a whole range of psychosocial services. What then happens is that we find skewed services across the country. Women had multiple and often concurrent medical conditions: pregnancy, HIV, arthritis, diabetes, asthma, abuse-related injuries, which included burn and stab wounds, substance abuse, etc. The mental health issues in all provinces suggested that women had depression, anxiety, some were attempting suicide, some had committed suicide, schizophrenia, bipolar, borderline personality disorders, post-traumatic stress disorders, and a whole host of other issues that came up in terms of mental health. The issue is that there's a scarcity of resources in the immediate vicinity of resources, particularly where mental health is concerned. And sometimes women have to make months before they can get an appointment with a psychiatrist. Transport is often unavailable, and shelters try to do their best to help. Now, we know that the transport issue is worse in rural areas than it is in the urban areas. However, as I said before, because of the assistance of Uber, in the 4 provinces where Uber operates, that's Gauteng, the Western Cape, KZN, and I forget the other province. and the Eastern Cape. In those provinces, we are fortunate to have had help, but most police stations complain about not having enough transport or vans to be able to transport victims to police stations, to other kind of resources that women need. Women's legal and practical needs were extensive in terms of maintenance, divorce, custody applications, as well as protection orders. Women brought young children with them to shelters who required much support, but services were limited. So most women go to shelters with their children. Not all shelters are able to offer services to children. Again, it's a resource dependent. But the need to access healthcare and schooling isn't always easy. Programs for school children is also dependent on funding and resource availability. They need food, clothing, nappies, psychosocial services, school programs, homework support, transport, stationery, and creche fees. Creche fees themselves are very expensive. Some shelters are able to offer creche facilities on their premises. Many offer informal creche facilities, but in general, most women are not able to afford sending their children to creches outside the shelter. Women needed help with upskilling and finding employment. The less resource shelters, tried to do whatever they could in providing skills development programs. This is a really, really important part of the work of shelters. And again, this varies from one shelter to another, depending on the types of resources available to them. Women are also required to help to exit shelters. Often women don't have a choice as to housing or where they actually can go to. And we find that we struggle with the Department of Human Settlements. In fact, from all 4 Indabas, we have struggled to reach the Department of Human Settlement. We've invited them to come and present so that we can work together to ensure that our clients are given some sort of priority. But this remains a challenge. We did find, however, that in the Mpumalanga province, Human Settlements managed to build a few houses for survivors of gender-based violence. We also invited them, but they were unable to attend to share with us how it is this actually happened on the ground. Often shelter staff go without salaries. And then this limits us in terms of therapeutic and child services. So while this is the result of the research in 2018, it still continues today. Then if we look at the research on raising women's voices, just outcomes from that research suggested that the interviews revealed the importance of shelters providing refuge, healing, emotional and psychological support to women. The experiences of women in shelters points to unacceptable levels of violence akin to torture in war. Many women who experienced intimate partner violence grew up in abusive family situations. On average, women stayed in shelters for between 2 and 7 months, where shelters were able to provide that length of service. In this time, women were enabled to had an opportunity to heal and experience different types of relationships in a home environment. Prior to being referred to a shelter, very few women knew about places such as shelters where they could get help. 70% of the women who took shelter from abusive partners did not know about the existence of shelters at the time. 99% of the women who came to shelters experienced positive change in themselves and in their life circumstances. Most women still experience precarious financial and housing issues as well as employment issues. Second stage shelter housing needs are to be more widely made available to prepare women to be able to continue their lives. In some instances, the police failed to assist women who called on them for help. Shelter staff felt that they were not adequately trained, and they felt overstretched, and they struggled with burnout. One of the things that keeps coming up, although this research ended in 2019, that the salaries for shelter staff are really very poor in comparison to shelter staff salaries for social workers at DSD. This is just an indication of the kinds of capacity building that was conducted in the last year. So I'm not going to go through it at the moment. Other work that the NSM has done is we've worked in mining communities on GBV in Mpumalanga, Limpopo, and the Northwest. During COVID, the NSM suddenly had to take on a role of disbursing emergency funding and PPE, which we were really not prepared for. But we had to do this for shelters to survive, because many shelters told us they'd be closing if this didn't happen. So the NSMSA actually disbursed an amount of 19,637,000 during COVID. The NSMSA also holds monthly webinars on gender-based violence topics. We developed a safety plan a while ago, which is also available on our website, and this is for women wanting to leave abusive relationships. The NSMSA has presented at all 4 world conferences on shelters, the first one being in Canada, then the US, the Netherlands, China. The next one actually takes place in Australia, and we're hoping that the NSMSA will find the funding to be able to take a team there to be able to present, to both learn and share what it is we're doing in South Africa and how we can learn from people that are presenting at the World Conference. We've published a resource manual entitled Letting Our Power Glow, Activities to Build Women's Power, and this has been distributed to shelters across the country. We served on the Presidential Interim Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Steering Committee. We've made several submissions to the amendments to the recent GBV Acts. We've provided year-long coaching of shelters in 8 provinces and continue to do so at this point. We continue media engagement through print, radio, TV, and online submissions. The NSM also serves as a member of the Global Network of Women's Shelters. We serve as a board member on that body. We have been invited previously by the Charlize Theron Foundation and the DG Murray Trust to be part of the Sukutula team to review funding proposals for community organizations and CSOs in Limpopo and the Eastern Cape. So I'm going to start looking at some of the challenges that the NSMSA experiences. Firstly, there's a lack of standardization of shelter services across the country, but also within provinces. So what do I mean by this? This doesn't only happen at the financial level, it also happens at the servicing level. And the reason this happens is that the National Department of Social Development doesn't really have oversight of these different provinces. Each province decides what it needs to do in terms of servicing shelters. So different provinces are doing different things. We also find that with some shelters, like government shelters, the Kusaleka shelters, provide more services to their clients than other shelters are able to do. So, for example, in KwaNobuhle, they can offer psychologist services in different languages. And unfortunately, other shelters in other provinces in the country are not even able to offer psychologist services, let alone in different languages. There's clearly unequal service delivery between government shelters and NGO shelters. Then, in terms of institutional realignment of shelters, which my colleague will talk to when she talks about the Gauteng crisis, but just to say that shelters are often threatened that their services are going to be taken away. And so shelters are left with this uncertainty that government is going to take over shelters. We are not sure because the communication in this regard is completely unclear. There's a partnership and communication and relationship building opportunity with different government departments. The NSMSA has a good relationship, in all honesty, with the National Department of Social Development. However, it seems to us that even social development struggles to get the other players, government departments, around the table at the national level. So, for example, we struggle with getting the Department of Health, Human Settlement, the South African Police Services, Home Affairs, Correctional Services, Justice, to work together at a national level. In some provinces, shelters have managed to develop better relationships with their provincial departments, but this also varies. The relationships with municipalities are generally very, very poor. And this, was a direct experience of the NISA Institute as well, where in terms of trying to make sure that we were compliant, people had to run from pillar to post at the municipalities to find out who would be the right people to work with. There was absolutely no support from the Department of Social Development in Gauteng to assist in this regard. And, clearly, gender-based violence is not only the responsibilities of the NPOs in the country, but sometimes it becomes very lonely and very difficult when the support from the government departments is not forthcoming. We need to prioritize housing. Abused women and their children are not prioritized, neither by the Department of Human Settlements, the city councils, and this is not for lack of trying or for reaching out from the side of shelters. There's also a lack of mental health and substance abuse services for survivors of GBV that are not adequate. Many women who come to shelters after years of abuse struggle with issues of mental health, and sometimes quite severe mental health issues, as I pointed out earlier. Some women also resort to substance abuse, and even if that means over-the-counter medication, as a means of coping with their lives. And so these services are really very necessary to help women. Some shelters, the biggest shelters, are able to offer these services, but by and large, most shelters are not in a position to do so. We need to actually go outside the shelter service to find that help. We've also experienced challenges in receiving follow-up feedback from the CGE report on sheltering, the investigations they did on sheltering, the 2022-2023 report. We recently invited the CGE to report at the National Shelter in Daba 2 weeks ago, and they did come, but unfortunately they presented an older version of a report. Then the Public Protector's report clearly indicates that there's need for more shelters to be established. And the question for us is, if the report has established this, what is actually being done post the report of the Public Protector? There are challenges that we experience in terms of the Gauteng funding crisis, and this has been extremely traumatic for shelters in the sector in Gauteng. I'm going to ask Sima in a minute to come and talk to this, but before that, just to say that there's continued risk to the safety of women with decreased operational capacity and suspension or closure of shelters in Gauteng in particular. So I'm going to hand over to Sima to talk about the Gauteng funding. Do I have one more slide? Sorry. So she'll come back a little later. Just in terms of the non-financial challenges, we experienced decreased service quality to survivors. There's an inability to provide comprehensive services to address the diverse needs of victims, which is addiction, mental health, disability needs, and medical needs. There's difficulty making the day-to-day operational decisions when funding is not available. We often have to turn victims away. This is a very painful thing. When shelters don't receive funding and victims come to your door, it's one of the most painful things to say to a victim, I'm sorry, we can't take you because we can't cater for your needs. We don't have the ability to say to them, we haven't received our funding, and so therefore we can't actually take you in. So the 24-hour helpline has been struggling this year in particular in placing shelters, women in shelters in Gauteng, because so many shelters actually shut their doors because of a lack of funding. There's clearly a loss of confidence in and reliance on shelters. We cannot operate with an open door and shut door policy. This kind of service doesn't work that way. This perpetuates poverty, violence, and further inequality of women as victims. Staff burnout becomes a problem. There's staff despondency, low morale, job uncertainty, and organizational instability as well, which makes it very difficult to continue to provide services in a hopeful way. And it also means that we're unable to plan adequately. In terms of the financial issues, funding for survival and sustainability is truly problematic. DSD provides 41% of funding to shelters, and the balance of the funds have to be fundraised by shelters. This is incredibly difficult in this economic climate. Often we are told by foreign donors who used to fund previously, but to fund shelters, they clearly tell us that South Africa is now a medium-level economy, and these are essential services which your government should be able to support. Shelters are unable to utilize DSD funding for compliance issues. So this becomes a problem because shelters have to fundraise for it. Recently, we've had one shelter that had to spend 500,000 Rand to ensure compliance issues. And there's absolutely no support from those provincial departments to ensure compliance. This makes it very, very difficult if you're not able to use the funding from social development at a provincial level. Then shelters receive this delayed disbursement of funds. I mean, shelters need to be able to offer services, feed people, pay salaries. And sometimes the SLAs or the disbursements are only received in August of the year when it should start by April. So in the interim period, it makes it very difficult for shelters to actually continue their work. Sometimes shelters receive the incorrect amount. Sometimes it's too little, sometimes it's too much. Salaries for shelter workers, as I've said previously, is not compatible with DSD social work salaries. and to let you know that shelter social workers work incredibly hard. They have no benefits whatsoever for shelter staff. The City of Johannesburg does not offer rebates or waivers to shelters for utility bills. We know that some other provinces do so. Shelters experience severe challenges by the DSD funding crisis. The SLAs for some shelters have problematic clauses attached to them. This doesn't happen to every single shelter, but certainly happens to several shelters. I've talked about the institutional realignment, and Seema will talk to that. Then, in terms of the minimum wage, we know that South Africa has a minimum wage, 27.50, I think it's per hour. But care workers in shelters in Gauteng receive 25.48 Rand per hour, the house mothers 26.84, the drivers 24.98, and this is lower than the minimum wage. So we are actually in contravention of that as well. Psychologists are hired preferentially, as I've said previously. And then I want to raise an issue of a shelter in Berea and Hillbrow. The Home of Hope was established in 2000. They have not received any funding from the Department of Social Development in Gauteng. In fact, the director said to me, they receive pejorative comments from officials at the department, such as, these are not your daughters. Why are you so worried? Let them go. And they have been trying to raise private funds and are really, really struggling. This is the kind of thing that really needs to be addressed. So just in terms of funding, I want to point out that I'm only taking the NISA shelter as an example, but for 22 beneficiaries, we receive 70 Rand per person per day. That 70 Rand includes 3 meals and snacks for the day, transport for clients, crisis aid, children's outings on a quarterly basis, school materials, educational materials, books and toys, pest control and cleaning, detergents, linen, first aid, and toiletries. This is insufficient. At a minimum, at an absolute minimum, in this day, you need at least 200 Rand, if not more. I'm not going to go through the rest of it. It's there and available. And to just say that as far as the national shelter movement goes, we work on prevention, awareness, policies, legislation, capacity building for shelters. We offer in-person workshops at the national level, and we also offer online workshops. And we receive an amount of 759,000 for the year. I'm going to hand over to Seema to talk to the issue of the Gauteng funding crisis.
Thank you so much. That was very well explained, Dr. Zubeida. Thank you so much. So in terms of the challenges experienced, in terms of accessing funding with the Department of Social Development in Gauteng, we have been told that there's an institutional realignment project that mandates or that says that the department is mandated to render core services through a variety of programs.
My sincere apology, ma'am. As I asked with Dr. Dango, would you please introduce yourself to the members?
My apologies. My name is Seema. I am from the NISA Institute for Women's Development. I am the programs manager at the organization. So it's just kind of like a case study that we have put together to show the kind of challenges that we have gone through as an organization, which is sort of an example of all of the other organizations that have gone through similar struggles. Is that okay?
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. I just needed the members to know who it is that is providing this eye-opening information. Thanks.
Sure. So like I was talking about I think Nzibeda has mentioned the institutional realignment project. So with regards to the institutional realignment project, the Gauteng Department of Social Development has noted that it is their mandate to render core services through a variety of programs to aid and enable target groups to effectively deal with adverse social conditions. They are also saying that they have increased their internal capacity to provide services, thus leading to a decreased reliance on non-profit organization. They are also saying that amidst the shrinking budget, that it is difficult to keep up the costs of supporting non-profit organizations. And they are saying this amidst the return of about 554 million rands from the department back to Treasury. So that doesn't actually make sense. And then they are also saying that their current partnership with non-profit organizations is unsustainable and at the expense of state capacity. However, we are actually doing a lot of the work without state resources. As Zubeda mentioned, only 41% of shelter costs are actually coming from the department. And so the rest of it are through donations and subsidizing that through other funding sources. So if they are needing to take over services and they can't assist in fulfilling the costing of shelters in terms of the way in which we run them, and yet Kusuleka models cost a whole lot more, that argument just doesn't make sense. In terms of retrieval of services, they are saying that they will not be considered, this will not be considered for residential facilities as yet. However, I know that they are looking to take over some of the services in terms of the child protection organizations. And then they are also looking to reduce the number of funded organizations or nonprofit organizations. In terms of the municipal compliance and the challenges experienced in this regard, there's a number of requirements that are required in terms of rezoning, compliance with health and hygiene requirements, fire safety regulations. All of these cannot be done concurrently. You need to do it one step at a time because there are prerequisites in terms of, say, for instance, your health and hygiene requirements, your fire safety requirements. You would require a zoning certificate. Unfortunately, this takes a lot of time. So it is time intensive, and then it is also cost intensive. I think Dr. Zubeda has alluded to this. For us, as an organization, it costed us over 300,000, and it has taken over 3 years to ensure that all of these requirements are met. We are now fully compliant, and I'm not saying the municipal requirements are not needed. However, there is a need for the department to understand what it takes to be able to get these compliance documents in place, and to understand that it is cost and time intensive. And instead of being persecutory in that manner, to work with us to assist us with maybe municipal costs in terms of the City of Johannesburg costs to come out and assess the organizations or the property on which the organizations are operating from. What is also a problem in terms of the municipal compliance is that it is not standard and applied consistently across the different regions in Gauteng. So I'm not even talking about across the country. This is within Gauteng. The different regions don't apply it consistently. So there are different requirements across the different municipalities, which makes it a little bit unfair. So for instance, you might require health permit in some municipalities, and then the department requires everybody within Gauteng to get this. However, the city of Johannesburg told us that because we are not sort of a commercial entity that, for example, like a hotel, that we don't need a health permit. It was a real struggle, and eventually I had to get the municipality to talk to the Gauteng Department of Social Development, and they then had to come to some kind of understanding. They didn't want to listen to me to say that actually the municipality is saying that this is not a requirement, and without that we would be considered non-compliant. But it is not my duty or responsibility to ensure that they are talking to each other. If they want us to ensure that we are municipally, compliant with the different municipal regulations, they need to at least know what the municipal requirements are. And so that's why I'm saying that there's a lack of understanding in terms of the processes involved, and they are not able to provide NPOs with direction. And this is a problem, and it's a challenge, because we are then persecuted in terms of non-compliance, especially in terms of municipal non-compliance. Currently, I think there are only 2 shelters that are operational, and mostly as a result of municipal non-compliance, and this is in the Johannesburg region. So it leaves the organizations as well as the beneficiaries with a lack of the ability to provide services and receive services. There's also a lack of communication in terms of timely communication, as well as the approach in which they communicate. But I think Dr. Zbeda has alluded to a lot of this already. Again, in terms of communication, the adjudication of proposals was delayed in 2024. They restructured the internal processes, which led to difficulties in having organizations being communicated in terms of whether or not they will be getting funded. And this delay resulted in numerous shelters across Gauteng being closed, and this eventually ended up having survivors being denied services, whilst the rate of GBV actually increased from 8 women being killed a day to 11 women being killed a day. So in that regard, there's a regressive realization of rights for survivors. And if they are not able to adjudicate proposals, how are they going to be able to take over services? And this whole process has created such a lack of trust between nonprofit organizations and the government. It has also shown that there is great power imbalance. So there's no sense of partnership, which they consistently talk about. There's no room for discussions or negotiations. It is a be-all and end-all. If you don't sign the SLA as it is, then you won't necessarily be getting funding. So while there are challenges in Gauteng, which I managed to speak to, there are also challenges in other provinces like the KZN. And in that regard, the shelters have noted that, again, there's a lack of communication amongst the KZN, DSD, and nonprofit organizations. There's disparity in terms of how and when tranches get paid. So I think Dr. Zubeda has alluded to this as well, in terms of sometimes they get paid the full amount, sometimes there's a shortfall, and the way in which this gets disbursed to them is ineffective and inappropriate, and it makes it difficult to reconcile. It makes it difficult to plan with regards to shelters operations. Social work post funding gets stopped while they are recruiting for social workers, and this leaves organizations in a precarious position with limited resources and the ability to provide services to their clients eventually. DSD agreements in accordance with SLAs are also not always honored. So this leads to unnecessary insecurity. They also do a lot of monitoring and evaluation visits, which they do across the country. In Gauteng, I think it's a fair process. In KZN, I think it's some of the organizations are noting that it is a fair process, and some of them are noting that it actually isn't a fair process, because they say that while gaps are found, there's no support to kind of fill those gaps. They are also saying that there is, and I think Dr. Zubaydah has alluded to this as well, that there's disparity in terms of survivor subsidies. So what Gauteng would get would be different to what KZN would get, different to what the Western Cape would get. And this disparity leaves us questioning, is one survivor more important than other survivors across the country, or if they access services from Kusulekas, they would be in a better position to recover. Why can't we just offer the same kind of services across the different shelters, whether it's a government-run shelter or the beneficiaries at the end of the day are the same, and they continuously say that our beneficiaries are their beneficiaries. So why the disparity? Likewise, in terms of salaries for social workers who work for nonprofit organizations versus the government. Thank you so much. I'll hand you over back to Dr. Zubaydah.
Thank you, Seema. So that's really the conclusion of our presentation, and we've just flagged the number of the National Shelter Movement outline for your information. And I'd like to thank you again for this opportunity. Our website address is on the screen, as well as our YouTube page, which has a lot of information on the work that the National Shelter Movement does. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dango, for this presentation, and for Ms. Missa for her for her presentation as well. This is very enlightening, eye-opening, and quite fascinating, especially when it comes to the, at least in my view, when it comes to the challenges that the shelter movement continues to face in the work that they are doing. As a representative of Gauteng in the National Assembly, as a member of parliament that is representing Gauteng, whilst I have been in contact with colleagues who are in Johannesburg, in Johannesburg and Gauteng, about the challenges that are being faced by the NPO sector in Gauteng, I think what has been presented this morning is shedding a different kind of light, which is very concerning, obviously, because of, in any case, the nature of the work that the National Shelter Movement is doing, and in particular, the shelters around the country that are affiliated to the movement. But I will not ask my questions at the moment, because I would like to give the opportunity to the honorable members who have set out these presentations for them to ask questions to Dr. Dango and the team that she has brought to the meeting today. And so I will be taking hands from the members. I see Honorable Mare, his hand is up. I have not seen any other member. If Dr. Dango and anyone else that will be responding could just be jotting notes as the questions are being asked. What I will be doing is take questions from all the members and then hand over back to you to respond to those comments and questions that would have been asked. So I can't see other hands. Oh, I see Honorable Abrams. His hand is also up, and Honorable Mahatu hand is also out, and Honorable Monyai, his hand is also up. So we'll start in that order. Honorable Murray, please take over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. Chairperson, I would like to say thank you for this presentation this morning. I just do what saying it is eye-opening because we listen to all these things all the time and we know about. It's nice to hear from the presenters. First of all, I want to thank the presenters for this slideshow, and thank you for the wonderful work they are doing. We know they are working under a lot of strain. It's difficult because you're not sure if you're coming or going. I just want to ask this one thing because I know the problems that they are experiencing is the same that we have listened to when we did the older persons bill, when the shelters for the older persons, the old age homes, were complaining about the restrictions that they are having and the compliance that they must introduce within the old age homes. And now the same thing is being said about the shelters. And like the lady of Johannesburg was saying, is that every municipality is having its own rules of how things must be done, and it is making things very difficult because it's unfair to some of these shelters. And I think the red tape, it is the problem because some municipalities are very stringent when it comes to their rules and how it must be implemented, and some is not even worried about how things have been done. And then the worst part is when you comply with all these restrictions that is put in place, it does not mean that you're going to get funding from DSD. And that is where the frustration of these people are coming in. And they are doing excellent work, because at the very moment, Chairperson, we're sitting with the scourge, we're sitting with the crisis of gender-based violence, where women are being murdered every day within their own homes. And like the previous speaker was saying, the first lady was saying, Zubaida was saying that, that when you are abused, you rather stay in the house because you got nowhere else to go. There is not enough shelters for these ladies. And even the municipalities are not providing housing for these ladies because they got nowhere to go. So that is a concern that we need to raise, because the president was saying that the gender-based violence is a crisis. And we have been saying all along that it's a crisis because you're being killed inside your home. You don't always hear about you were killed by a stranger, you were killed by a person that you know. And then the people that is working for these shelters, Chairperson, is being underpaid because they are stressed, they are working under a lot of pressure. And then when it comes to salaries, it's like they are just working day by day, and next day there's nothing to prove. I do know some people that is working for Bart, and sometimes we have conversations about these things, and they are frustrated, you know. And when you are in your workplace and you are underpaid and you are overworked and overstressed, you are not giving what you're supposed to give to those people that is in need of help. So my question is that, like the previous lady was saying, is that money was sent back to Treasury. You don't understand that because there's a lot of NPOs that did not get any funding. I think there must be a dialogue with all these NPOs, with the department, to say exactly what is going on, because when it comes to communication, like it was said previously, there's no communication, there's a communication barrier. And some of these DSD employers think they are doing you a favor, because I have a friend that's having an old age home, and DSD will come in, they will say, you must comply with this and that, and then she will do all those things, and she will come and say, you will never get funding because you're not complying with this and that, and I will make sure you're not going to get the funding. The same what the previous lady was saying is because they want to give to certain people that they know these fundings, and that really it's unfair because these people are giving a proper service to these ladies and to these old people. So I don't have questions, I have just concerns that I'm raising. Is that, yes, the shelter people are underpaid. Yes, they are overworked. There is not enough funding. And like they were saying, the funding comes, instead of April, it comes in August. How do you plan in a way like that? And then also, getting funding from outside is also not working. And the mere fact that gender-based violence is a crisis in our country, and the department is not even taking note of that. We are saying that there is unemployed social workers. Here you have social workers working for this NPOs, but they are underpaid. After studying so many years, they come and do a service and they're not getting paid for that service. That is a crisis. And it is so nice to listen to what these people are saying, because your heart goes out to these people because they are trying to do the best with what they are having. And at the moment, they don't have much to work with, but they are still trying to do the best. In Bloemfontein, I always talk about the place where I'm coming from. There was a shelter for men and a shelter for women. That gentleman, every year, we used to have a program at the University of Free State. He will have the program skills development, and anyone from the community can come in and learn the skills. And the ladies that are staying in that home will teach other ladies from outside how to do needlework, how to do all the different types of things. And it was very nice, because I used to go, because it used to be over 3 days. The owner of the place has passed on. They're not having that program anymore, but they are still having the shelter. Someone else took over the shelter. But these shelters are struggling, because some of the shelters that they are having, especially the men, they will have to pay maybe 100 Rand or 50 Rand a night to sleep there. But what about the unemployed women? They teach these women these skills, but for them to go back into the community, where they're going to go stay, they don't have a place to stay. They are unemployed, and these skills not always assist them to make sure that they have a living on a daily basis. So this is the crisis that we are sitting with. And as long as the department don't acknowledge this crisis, we are going to sit with this crisis for the rest of our lives. And I'm very happy that there is compassionate people, passive people about this thing. But we need to come up as department. How are we going to deal with this problem? And come up with a solution of how we can address this problem, because NPOs is playing the role of the government that they are not playing. And I want to say thank you to those people, Chairperson. I don't want to drag this thing, but this thing is so close to my heart. It's actually bringing tears to my eyes to say that these people are putting in everything and they're not getting the assistance that is needed. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Maria. I was about to ask you to wrap up your inputs that are appreciated a lot. Honorable Abrams, please.
Thank you, Chairperson. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to the presenters for the presentation. And also thank you for the updated presentation, which had a lot more information, because that answered a lot of the questions I had. And Chairperson, it's because of, we asked that our committee invite, more stakeholders and hear from more stakeholders for exactly this kind of information. And that is that we have often told DSD that the lived reality on the ground is extremely different to the boardroom presentations that we receive from them. And that is why it's so important for us to actually hear directly from stakeholders. Chairperson, it is somewhat reassuring that, the National Shelter Movement's 24-hour toll-free line still works. And while they do maybe a fraction of what the Gender-Based Violence Command Council should be doing, that GBV Command Council is currently closed due to, the new contractor not being able to meet the requirements. And, Chairperson, this again highlights the critical need for NPOs and for NPOs to be funded, because they do fill in when government cannot and when government fails to do. Chairperson,
Honorable Abrams, sorry. When you say command council, you mean the command center?
Command center, yes. Sorry, Chairperson.
Okay.
Command center, the GBV command center that is currently closed. Chairperson, we also often hear from the department that there are intergovernmental forums and working groups that meet regularly. And to hear that there are compliance issues of this nature that sit at local government, and that there is no liaison person within local government, province and national to assist the NGOs is very concerning, and perhaps something that we can take up with the minister and the provinces to see exactly what is the role of those, forums and working group, if not this. Chairperson, I do want to ask the attitude of the officials. Is this attitude ever reported to the department? And if so, does the presenters know if anything happens? Is the bad attitude of officials reported? Then, Chairperson, the Khuseleka centers. I know we've been told the operational cost of a Khuseleka center is about 50 million rand. Is it the NGOs? Is there perhaps a view that by establishing more of these centers, it's a way, is this part of the realignment that government is talking about, and a way to, shut down more NGOs or defund more NGOs? Then also the presenter mentioned that the department wants to take away some of the services of the child protection organizations. I'd just like to understand, which services in particular, because we do know that government is stretched with capacity and resources. So I would just like to know, which services that they would like to take over. Chairperson, I'd also like to know the first presenter, the doctor, she mentioned that they struggled to get a quorum at the Indaba. Now I see the Indaba took place on the 25th of October. Is this a standing item in the diary? Because sometimes we hear that, invitations don't reach who they need to reach. Was it a hybrid sit-in? I just would like to understand that. And then, Chairperson, I'm almost done, but you will recall that the Minister of Public Works, when it was still Minister Patricia de Lille in 2000, handed over shelters for the purpose of gender-based violence shelters, and they handed over 6 to the Western Cape and 5 to Gauteng. And the 6 in the Western Cape, they were up and running. I think 1 was up and running within that first month. And all of those 6 shelters are now up and running and servicing women, whereas the 5 shelters allocated to Gauteng are not up and running. And just to hear, and I understand that, it requires funding, but to hear that more shelters are closing, yet the presenter spoke that there's a lack of housing. And here we have these government shelters just standing vacant, actually being, they're actually housing security guards, to protect these shelters from being inhabited. And, they actually cost millions to be refurnished. And even the security is costing a monthly price tag. So that is very concerning, Chairperson. And then just 2 more points, Chairperson. Slide 3 mentions that there's no legislative provisions for regulations of shelters for victims. So in the last term, and it's on the agenda again for this term, there is the Victim Support Services Bill. And initially that bill was withdrawn because the sector came back to say that there was a lot of red tape that would make operating a shelter, such as compliance issues, extremely difficult. And they would not, be able to get their registration as an NPO and so forth. I'd just like to understand, has the presenters, have they given input into the updated bill? Because this committee hasn't seen the updated bill because it's still a cabinet. So have they given the input in that bill? And then I just would like to find out, the sector, they're at the coalface of this pandemic with GBV. And I'd like to know, in their opinion, are we anywhere near to winning this war on gender-based violence? And then just a last comment, Chairperson, our program has changed in that we are on Constituency Week next week. And that was when we were supposed to hear from the Gauteng Department and the MEC, because this remains a very critical topic, the defunding of NGOs for Gauteng. And, maybe in our internal meeting, we really do need to urgently make sure that we get the MEC and her department in front of us. Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you once again to the presenters.
Thank you, Honorable Abrams. Yes, the change of the program has meant that we need to reprioritize the items of our programs that have had to be moved in favor of the changing of the parliamentary program. But thank you for your comments. I will now go to Honorable Makgato.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And I just want to welcome the report. It seems these people are working. The first question, I just want to check the money they are giving them to the employees, or how do they regulate money to pay those employees? Because I can see, or there are numbers of employees, and it seems they are not associated with anything. Secondly, the women's legal and practical needs extension, maintenance, divorce, and others. How are they helping women on this matter? So I just want to check for on this one, how are they, what is their plan to help women on this matter? And then another thing, I saw the lack of standardization of shelter services across the country and within the provinces. And then my question on this one says, how can you improve the standardization so that we can realize their way of doing in that particular system? Lastly, they spoke about the municipal compliance, e.g. the cost-intensive safety regulations and others. There are many. So I just want to check, or did they manage to apply for any compliances now? So those are my questions. I just want to check some few questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Makgato, for your questions and your comments. I just want to mention that I recognize the new hands of Honorable Mtsweni and Honorable Ramaila. So you will be after the Honorable Munyai. Honorable Munyai, over to you.
Thank you. Maybe it's important to acknowledge the report and the work that the organization is doing, and further acknowledge the work of the advocate who has written report to United Nations agency. Very, very, very important task. And I'm saying them on behalf of Sarki Bartman Center for Women and Children based in the Western Cape. But for the both two organizations, maybe before I ask the question, Honorable Chair, I've made a fundamental proposal in one of our meetings that we need to meet with all the provincial government, NECs, to present to us as the portfolio committee on the work that they're doing to support the NGO, various NGO with respect to funding and so on, and various activities that they do that we have not yet done. I will appeal that because they have authority to account. They receive budget, they must account on what they do. I will appreciate this matter to be factored in the program so that we can hear what impact are they making to various organizations, what weaknesses are they experiencing and challenges, so that we must look at the challenges of the NGO, NPOs, holistically, all of them, so that way we have the nature of the impact, that the weaknesses that they're experiencing in responding to the massive need of the NGO. Firstly, as I said, I welcome the presentation, Honorable Chair. And I must say that the work that they do is very important work in society. But I just want to go back in the period of COVID-19. The period of COVID-19. There was a Human Rights Commission report here in Cape Town concerning the city of Cape Town COVID-19 shelter for the street-based people in Strandfontein, Cape Town. And I'm saying the Strandfontein issues, maybe that's how I must be able to share. Are they aware of such report? Because that report relates to the concern and the report alleging the violation of human rights, dignities, health, and for kids and women who were removed from the street and put in one tent together with the 19 transgender women and with a pregnant woman, 4 disabled women in wheelchair, and with 80 substance abusers in the very same tent. But in particular, I want to look at the issues of the children. Did maybe perhaps the women that are dealing with the organization that are dealing with the shelter issues, whether they were able to hear about this development? And when these all these people that are mentioned were being forcefully removed and by security companies coupled with law enforcement agencies, if they are aware, what role did they play in responding to the shelter for these needy younger children that were removed from the family, from the site? And I just want to get a sense from them if they are aware of such experiences. I'm raising this issue, Honorable Chair, with the understanding of the good work that they're doing in society, with the understanding and acknowledging the advocate, the work that she's doing, and after McLeod has resigned as well, being the leader of that institution, the Saki Bachman Center for Women and Children. And I'm saying this in context of the broader presentation that has been made today. I know they're doing a great work, but are they aware of this development? Did they play any role to support or to try to assist these younger children and women who were trapped in such devastating situation during the COVID-19, which I know, of course, has brought havoc or the unprecedented consequences that humankind has ever seen? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Nyai, for your comments and your questions. I will hand over to Honorable Mtsweni. Honorable Mtsweni, are you with us? If you could please just unmute and then pose your questions and comments, please. Okay, it looks like Honorable Mtsweni is encountering challenges in joining us. I will, in the meantime, hand over to Honorable Ramaila. Thanks, Honorable Ramaila.
Thank you, Chair. And let me start with my apology for logging in slightly late. And I appreciate the presentations that have been made. First, Chair, on my observation, and that will not necessarily relate to the presentations, that they just raise an issue that to some of us, I think we are sort of shooting from the hip and leaning on side. But if that is what's to be, I'm sure one will really have to go that way. And I'll tell you why I'm really saying that. If given an opportunity, there might be matters I would want to raise, but that would be sort of in committee, Chair. If given that opportunity, then I'll then be able to raise them there. And my first question is to the presenters, is how is their relationship with government, with parliament, with the department? Is it adversarial or is it cordial? Secondly, is that what I would want to find out from them is whether is the organizations completely apolitical or partisan. In the sense of the point that we would want to understand is that in the operations, are they wanting to parallel government or are they wanting to partner with government? And I think it's a very critical thing for me to be able to understand. Thirdly, and it flows from the second question that I've asked, and I'm taking it from the presentations they've been making. For instance, looking at the comparison of salaries between themselves, or let me say NPOs, NGOs, and government. Whether have they ever done a benchmarking exercise with peers elsewhere else? Can be globally, can be in the country, can be continental, whatsoever. Was there a benchmarking exercise ever done with the peers, so that when we think it's fair if we compare salaries, but that we do that within the peers? And for me, that would be very understandable. Those are the three questions. But then I have two recommendations to make, Chair. The first recommendation is that they have referred to the Public Protector's report, which some of us, new as we are not aware of that report. However, I want to make a recommendation that the progress report on the implementation of the Public Protector's findings be presented to the Portfolio Committee within 14 days. Secondly, given how we have been receiving presentations so far, I think this is the third week, if I'm not wrong, if not the fourth week, is that I feel we may need to make a recommendation to the minister to convene some sort of a consultative seminar with the NPOs, NGOs, etc. And precisely also to review or check the progress in as far as the previous meeting that they had, but this one specifically with the NPOs, NGOs. So that what I want us, Chair, to do is to avoid a situation where the Portfolio Committee is going to be bogged down to really receive presentations from the NPOs, NGOs, and so forth, and that might make us run into a risk of not paying much attention to certain strategic matters that the Portfolio Committee is supposed to be pursuing. So basically, these are the two recommendations I'm making. I have already made the disclaimer, Chair. It might be that I'm making these recommendations because of me being a novice in this portfolio. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Ramaila, for your comments and questions and recommendations that have been noted with the seriousness that I believe you are tabling them in. I just want to check if Honorable Mtsweni is back with us, and if Honorable Mtsweni can pose the questions, please. Honorable Mtsweni, over to you.
Good morning, Chairperson. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. I'm sorry for delaying because of my gadgets. Chairperson, thank you for presentation. I just have one question to the organization. I just want to ask, adult or hello.
Excuse me, sorry, there seems to be some noises being made. If all of us, except for Honorable Mtsweni, could please unmute. Oh, sorry, mute our microphones, please.
Chairperson, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. You can go ahead.
Chairperson, I just want to ask one question to the organization. Adult or children who do not have birth certificates, as organization, how did they assist? I ask this question because we have many children who do not have a birth certificate, especially we have many people who are coming from outside the country, but they give birth to their children in our country. They don't get help from our Home Affairs to get birth certificates for their children. Did the organization have any help? How did they assist those parents for their children to get birth certificates? That is my question. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Mtsweni, and thank you, colleagues, for your questions and your comments. I have
Chairperson. Chairperson.
Yes, Honorable Rev.
Chairperson, I can't raise my hand here. I don't know what's wrong with my gadget here.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
all right.
please. Can I come in?
Yes, you can come in. Thanks.
Thank you so much for the presentation with the work that the organizations are doing on the ground. I just have maybe one comment, one recommendation in terms of the department. We really need the department, the provincial department, to come in so that we could hear the synergies and the challenges that they are facing, so that we can then be able to mitigate the situation. I think right now we've got one side of which is the organizations having that trouble and not having that partnership or clear line of partnership with the department. So if ever we can really move with speed, I concur with my honorable also to say we really need the department to come and present their challenges and their success into this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Honorable Reverend Gwabaza, for your comments and for reiterating the important point of us needing to hear from the department, especially in provinces, their work, what it is that they are experiencing as they perform their constitutional role in the work that they are doing in provinces. I want to mention that we did discuss this issue in the committee. Honorable members would probably recall this, and we did say that there is a need for us to hear, especially after the department presented to us and say that whilst they are the ones that give budgets to provinces, due to the structural and framework that we have as a country, provinces have their own priorities that they can change, whatever it is that they would have submitted to the National Department of Social Development for them to receive those budgets. But then as things happen in their own provinces, they do have that authority to actually reprioritize what it is that they are going to do with the money. And those are just simple concurrence issues that we do need as the portfolio committee to work around. And I think the recommendation that was made was that we do need to then meet with the MECs and possibly their treasuries as well. So that point is well taken, and I am mindful that it was not asked of Dr. Dango and the team that she has come with, but I will now hand over to the National Shelter Movement of South Africa for them to respond as far as they can to the questions and comments that have been made by the honorable members. Over to you, Dr. Dango.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. Okay, so I'm going to start. The first question that I'll respond to was the attitude of the Department of Social Development in Gauteng, was that reported? Well, you know, we took the position that it is best to first talk to people before we would just go and report them. So the organization, the NSM, together with the Gauteng Crisis Care Committee, attended several meetings with the new MEC at the time, as well as the HOD in Gauteng. And of course, it started off very amicably. We had one meeting, a second one was to happen, which eventually didn't happen. So in the beginning, it seemed that we were on a good footing and things would work out. But having said that, things didn't go so well after that. And eventually, together with the support of the Gauteng Crisis Care Committee, we eventually were forced to get legal assistance on behalf of the NPOs and the shelters that we represent. So we didn't report it kind of differently, but we tried to deal with them directly. The second question in terms of services being taken over. So we are aware that funding is being reduced in certain sectors, in the care sector, for example, adoption, foster care, etc. And as far as shelters go, there are clear murmurings that services will be taken over. However, we did speak to National Development about that, who assured us that services will not be taken over. So I think there's a difference when you hear from National, there's a difference when you hear from the Gauteng province. And I think that it's this kind of unclear communication that starts creating more difficulty. If we can have clarity and direct communication, then shelters would know exactly what is happening and don't need to be fearful or uncertain about their services going forward. In terms of the question on the quorum, I think that I was saying that there was a quorum, that the NSM board is extremely dynamic, so much so that we had a full quorum at the National Indaba. Then the question on housing. So recently I was approached by National DSD, and they indicated that there were some houses available that shelters in Gauteng might be able to use. I was given the addresses, and then I was told to contact a certain person to go and view the houses. So the eventuality was that in trying to visit these houses, we were told that several of these houses are occupied, and that, people will have to be evicted. for us to be able to find a way to offer services, and that there were 1 or 2 houses that were still available. And I was given a name of a person to contact, whom I did contact. But basically, there was no response from the person. This was then communicated to National DSD as well. So I'm not sure exactly what the situation is regarding those houses. Then on the question of, are we winning the war on gender-based violence? Well, if you're asking my opinion, I would say no, because the numbers keep climbing. Our services are there, but they're not sufficiently there. So we can reach a certain number of survivors, but we can't reach everybody. There's still a huge need for shelters in the country. There's a need for second stage housing. There's a need for resourcing. And so on that basis, and given the fact that we're regularly getting more and more calls from survivors, I believe that we're currently not winning the war. And, in terms of the NSP, it's very clear that we're not winning the war. Then there was a question on the money given to employees. So in terms of the shelters, the money received from DSD already comes outlined in terms of what we can pay your employees or not. It's not market related in any way. What we do where possible, and where the nonprofit organization can raise funds, we might be able to top up the salary of the person, but this doesn't happen as a matter of regularity. On the question of maintenance and divorce, yes, all shelters, this is something that all shelters take very seriously. In Gauteng, we work with Fasken Martinau, and they sent out their legal representatives on a monthly basis to come and assist women. We also work with Pro Bono, and then other organizations work with other organizations that deal with maintenance and divorce. We also have board members, from those that are working within the maintenance and divorce sectors that we can call on if we're needing any further assistance. So that's what we're doing in terms of maintenance and divorce. Then there was a question in terms of improving the standardization of services. I think, in my opinion, the standardization of services cannot be the responsibility of the NPO sector. This is something that we might be able to contribute to in terms of our opinions and the work that we do. But essentially, we need to work together with government to be able to make those changes in standardization. In terms of municipal regulations, these are not clear at all. Exactly what has to happen, how it has to happen, and NPOs really struggle to get this kind of clarity and support from the municipalities. Then on the question of the report from COVID, on the human rights report on COVID, unfortunately, I was not aware of that report and the children. But I think that if we're talking about children alone, there are organizations dealing with children. And this was also a Western Cape report, so I'm not sure if Advocate Bacher is aware of this and if anything was done in that regard, but certainly hasn't come to my notice. Then, in terms of the relationships that the National Shelter Movement has with government, we have, I would say, an excellent relationship with the National Department of Social Development. What I mean with that, by that, is that we partner well with them. We've been running the first Indaba that the National Shelter Movement did was done independently, so we did it on our own. But as from the second Indaba, so the second, third, and fourth Indaba was in partnership with the National Development of Social Development and the Heinrich Böll Foundation. And, you know, I think that, you know, each Indaba has moved from being successful each year. So the relationship is good in that I think they listen. We're there to listen as well. And I think that there has been sufficient compromise on both sides for us to ensure that this partnership develops into a really strong partnership. So there's no problem at that level. Obviously, at the provincial level, in some provinces, shelters have a better relationship with their provincial government. And I can talk to, I know that that's so in Mpumalanga, that's so in the Free State, and it may be so somewhere else that I may not be aware of, but in Gauteng, this has become an adversarial relationship because we have gone to court and the department hasn't complied, you know, with the court orders. And so this has become a difficult situation. But what I'd like to say is that this was only done when, you know, when we were at our really desperate to make sure that services in Gauteng don't break down further. Our biggest concern were our survivors. And given that so many shelters closed down and the national helpline saying, where do I place people? This was becoming, you know, a critical issue. On the question of whether the NSM is a political or apolitical organization, we're completely apolitical. Our work talks to the women and children who need our help. So we are not partisan in that respect at all. And we are very open and willing to partner with government. We're not in competition. We can't be in partnership with the in competition with the state. We need to work together because we full well understand that gender-based violence is a societal issue. None of us, no stakeholder, can do this work on their own. It's an issue that we need to become very cohesive about so that we can win this war. Then in terms, I think, in terms of salaries, we know the differences because of the research that's been conducted and our continuous engagement with the representatives of the different provinces about what the salary comparisons are. And, you know, at shelters. And we welcome the recommendation made about having a consultative seminar, you know, with the department, as well as, you know, having the public protector report being tabled by the committee. In terms of the issue of migration of adult and adults and children, the directive that we receive in Gauteng is that we're not to take any undocumented people. This is a clear advisory that if people don't come, because when we report on our clients, we have to provide ID numbers of the clients. And so this does present a difficulty. However, what I'd like to say is that we do realize and we do sometimes get referrals of people that are migrant women. And we've recently just been approached by the United Nations UN Women on this issue, because they are proposing to start a project with migrant women in South Africa. But this is where the situation is at the moment. And I do believe that if the women are in the country, we should actually be helping them. We should not be turning them away. We also welcome the suggestion made that the provincial government needs to share their perspectives. We would be very happy if that would be done. So I think I've tried to cover everything. I'm not sure if I've left anything out.
Thank you, Dr. Dango, for those responses and the clarity that you have shared into the comments that the honorable members have made. Because as we start this 7th Parliament, we want, as the Portfolio Committee, to be ready and equipped, if you like, to make sure that we do our work in as much accessible to all the stakeholders that we have, which is probably why we made sure that as we meet with the government, with the department on a regular basis and hear of the work that they are doing, we thought, let's hear from the side of the NGOs that are doing statutory work on behalf and in partnership with government. So we appreciate these responses from the National Shelter Movement of South Africa. And in fact, we consider very seriously all the comments that you've made. And also we want to make sure that wherever whenever we need to meet with the stakeholders, we do so as part of our key mandates as members of Parliament and of course as the members of this Portfolio Committee. The stakeholders are as important to us as the department that we are oversighting, because together we understand that they are the ones that perform this very critical role of protecting and ensuring the well-being of the people who are poor and vulnerable, and in this case, those that are victims of ongoing, as now we hear that it might be that the needle is not moving in the direction that we would really hope it moves, because the issue of gender-based violence is continuing unabatedly in the country. I so want to thank you then for your coming through and for your, making the presentations and even responding to the questions of the honorable members. I see that the Honorable Nyai's hand is up. I would then hand over to him.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, and I think you're trying to do a good summary that reflects the presentation by the NPO NGO. The question that I've raised, I directed it to Advocate Bacha. I thought Advocate would comment because even the doctor who was presenting also asked if Advocate Bacha has something to say about it, or Advocate Bacha is aware of that. And again, I acknowledge what you did towards the United Nations. What you wrote to the United Nations. Thank you. That's all from me, Chair.
Advocate Butcher, you can come in as requested. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for inviting us to be here today. I am not aware of a report that has been referred to when it comes down to care that was given to children during the COVID-19 pandemic, but I can assure the honourable member that all assistance that was necessary for women and children survivors of gender-based violence during COVID-19, we worked very hard as the Western Cape Women's Shelter Movement to make sure that they will all receive the necessary care that they needed. As far as having the helpline being established to ensure that women had easy access to placements in shelters should they need them. There was also a very robust public awareness campaign that we conducted during the pandemic to make sure that women were protected and that they knew that shelters were open. And as Dr. Zubaydah alluded to earlier, we actually had the partnership with Uber that was set up during the campaign in order to get women and their children into the shelters. When it comes down to the shelter that was erected in Strandfontein to deal with the COVID cases, the shelter movement was assisting with regards to women and children GBV survivors and their placements during that time. We were working at that time very closely with the Department of Social Development in the Cape Town area to make sure that all women that needed it could get placements at the shelters. We even erected a two-phase admission structure to make sure that women were not only protected from the virus, but also that they could get all the care that they needed. So that was the efforts that we were assisting with during the pandemic, which kind of were dealt with across the board with all forms of assistance that women needed, even so far as, and Dr. Dangle also spoke to the COVID-19 safety planning that was devised in order to keep women that were actually at home with their abusers to help them to keep themselves safe. I'm not sure whether that fully answers your question.
Thank you so much, Advocate Bacha, for that response, which I hope that the Honourable Mnyai is taken note of as a response to his question. Honourable members, I would like to then go to our second part of this meeting, which is the briefing by the Gauteng Care Crisis Centre on the funding, resourcing and compliance to norms and standards of NPOs in South Africa. As I hand over to the Gauteng Care Crisis Centre, I would like to thank them for coming through or for logging into the platform and for accepting our invitation. As obviously the Portfolio Committee on Social Development, we are acutely aware of the work that they do and many other organizations that they are doing the work in this sector. Your work is highly commendable. And we are looking forward to hearing from you today as you present to us. And as it happened with the National Shelter Movement of South Africa, you will then at a later stage have questions and comments being made by the members of the Portfolio Committee, and so that you can respond to them. But I now hand over. Again, I would like whoever is leading the team or the delegation of the Gauteng Care Crisis Centre to please introduce themselves and their teams, and then go ahead and present to us. But thank you so much for being here today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Honourable Masanga. I'm just going to briefly switch on my video. Can you see me? Yes. My name is Lisa Vetten. I'm the chairperson of the Gauteng Care Crisis Committee and based as a research associate at the Southern Centre for Inequality Studies at WITS. So what I am presenting is very much a macro level analysis. You did ask for a national picture, which is what we tried to do by going through various budget reports. So I'm not necessarily going to be going into the kind of day-to-day detail of individual services, but I want to try and give you a detailed and in-depth picture of the context of funding so that you can understand some of the difficulties facing social care services in South Africa as a whole, and then very specifically how they impact upon NPOs directly. So just briefly, a bit of a background on the Gauteng Care Crisis Committee. It was formed in 2023 by accident, and I say by accident. It came into existence when it became apparent that the Gauteng Department of Social Development had cut almost R500 million, approximately 417.6 million, from budgets to social care services to NPOs. There was no advance warning. Organizations went to bed on the 30th of March employed and woke up on the 1st of April to discover that they were unemployed and that their organizations were no longer receiving funding and they had been given no warning of it. And I think on that basis, organizations mobilized quickly. There were protests by the committee as well as other NGOs, and the result was that in May, the Premier reversed the decision of the department and reinstated some of that money, not all of it, but it did allow for many organizations to once again open up and continue with their services. However, it became apparent to us that the problems that we had temporarily averted had not gone away. And throughout 2023, we attempted to continue attending meetings with the department, writing to the department, asking for communication around what was happening to funding. There was no communication. Actually, what then happened in March of this year was that the department attempted to take out an urgent
apology. Sorry, Ms. Vetten. My sincere apology. There's a request for you to put your presentation on slide mode, please.
Okay, let me see. Sorry, I should move some of these.
Slideshow. There's slideshow. There we go.
Yeah.
And then there we go. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm just going to close this as well. So the department attempts to take out an urgent interdict against all organizations in the province. In March of this year, they gave organizations exactly 3 days warning that they were going to do this. They did not even inform all organizations. We opposed the application and succeeded. The court said it was unconstitutional to attempt organizations to mobilize and organize. The situation did not improve, and in May, as Dr. Dangor was saying, we were forced to go to court and obtain an urgent supervisory order over the department in order to ensure that it started paying organizations. So that's just a very brief background. I mean, we're talking about the entire NPO sector in Gauteng, approximately 800 organizations, some of whom still remain unpaid, which I'll get to in a little bit later. Our membership is approximately 105 organizations. We work as a unit and as a collective. There is a great fear of victimization by the department, and you can just see in the action of attempting to interdict all organizations that fear is not unfounded. So that is why we deliberately work as a collective. We work on a systemic basis, and we try to work at the level of trying to change systems and problems. So individual organizations may take up their particular difficulties, but we try to work on behalf of changing the problems within the sector. So that's just a little bit of background around the Care Crisis Committee. I am going to make this a national presentation. And in order to do so, I've drawn from the provincial estimates of revenue and expenditure from each province. And I've used that in order to try to create tables for you to give a sense of funding in each province. Unfortunately, the data is limited. Free State only has available it's
My
may I-
sincere apology again. Your presentation has gone back to not
my
being
goodness.
slideshow. So sorry.
Okay. How's that? Yeah. Can you see it again?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
All right. I'm just going to switch off my video to prevent problems. So, as I've said, I've drawn information with the provincial estimates of revenue and expenditure. Free State only went up to 2022, 2023, even though we searched Treasury websites for it. So the information on Free State is limited. Where I have given information for this year, it comes from the department's budget speech. And Limpopo, Mpumalanga, Northwest and Northern Cape only have their estimates of provincial revenue and expenditure available until 2023, 2024. So because the data was limited, this year is not comparable, and I could not put things into nice, neat graphs for you. So my apologies. What I'm presenting does take the form of quite indigestible tables, but I hope they will make sense to you. But that's just to give you a sense of a background as to where the information came from, and then also where we network with organizations, especially in Eastern Cape, Northwest, and KwaZulu-Natal. I've tried to supplement there as well. I think I'm going to say at the outset that generally relationships seem better between Western Cape, Northern Cape, Mpumalanga and Free State. And so I am going to focus predominantly on the provinces where problems are being reported. KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, Eastern Cape and Northwest. But I am going to try and acknowledge where people have, obviously, where provinces are making an attempt. Okay, so I think just to give you a sense of how the system of social care or social welfare service in South Africa operates, this is very important to understand because this is, I think, how we understand why it is in the problem it is in today and why there is insufficient funding. So South Africa's first Department of Welfare was only established in 1937. But before they were established, there were already organizations who were providing services. And I mean, as a result, you have organizations in South Africa that are well over 100 years old by now. So because there was this already existing network and infrastructure right from the start, from 1938 onwards, in fact, the department was engaging in partnerships to ensure services were provided. And in 1997, following democratization and the release of the White Paper on Social Development, the Department of Social Development endorsed this partnership as a matter of policy and said it needed to continue. So the partnership takes its concrete form in terms of the subsidies that are allocated by DSD towards the provision of social services. Now, you must bear in mind that the word subsidy means it's only a part payment. It's not a payment in full, and it's the same system that government uses to subsidize both schools as well as higher education. So these are all three sectors, as well as health, where the department subsidizes others to provide services on their behalf. So these additional sources of funding can include other government departments. So disability organizations might get some funding from the Department of Health, for instance, donor organizations, corporate social responsibility, programs in the private business sector, trusts and foundations, and the proceeds from lotteries. So government services are funded in full, but they only fund NPOs partially on the understanding that they're going to be able to find the balance of service to top up the true cost of services from all these additional services, these additional sources of funding. As has already been noted, the bulk of this funding comes through the provincial offices. There's only a small number of NPOs with national offices that are funded by the national DSD. The number of NPOs subsidized by provinces is obviously much larger than the number of funded by the national department. And the size of the subsidy is at the discretion of the province, and it's not standardized through national policy. So what this means is that there's considerable variation in the amounts paid to organizations both within the same province as well as across different provinces. And in virtually all cases, the subsidies are inadequate to meeting the full cost of the service and have not kept pace with inflation. For example, Gauteng organizations, because of the issues that have gone on around with their subsidies, are actually receiving the same subsidy they were receiving in 2022, 2023. And I'm quite sure we can all agree that life has gotten a whole lot more expensive in the last three years. Just as another quick example from the Eastern Cape, which runs, their drop-in centres for children. The department there provides to organisations 150 Rand per child per quarter. So, just to put that in more context, they expect organisations to provide children at least one meal per day, 5 days a week, for 50 Rand per month per child. And they pay and they offer the caregivers in those centres a stipend of 2,300 Rand per month. That is below the minimum wage. The amount paid in Gauteng is far greater. So that's just one example of, I think, how, excuse me, clear indication of a subsidy that is not adequate to meeting the full cost of the service. I think one also has to take into account that in provinces like Eastern Cape, Limpopo, and Northwest, which are substantially poorer, it is that much harder for them to be able to go to whatever corporate sector exists in those provinces, to be able to ask for top-up funding. So they struggle even more because that wider network of that wider economy is not necessarily available to people in their provinces. I mean, another example is KZN. The cost of providing 24-hour care to frail persons, older persons, is 3,000 Rand per month per person, and it has been that amount since 2018. Sorry, you'll have to excuse me. So, what is the basis for NGOs? I'm sorry, I'm going to need to get a glass of water. If you could just excuse me for a minute. I've had a throat infection.
No problem at all. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So DSD's mandate explicitly derives from sections 27 and section 28 of the Constitution. And this is important in understanding why they need to be funding NPOs. It's correct that NPOs have no entitlement to funding. However, the beneficiaries, the people that NGOs serve, do have a right. And that right comes from section 27. And that is why the department is required to fund NPOs, is to ensure that services reach people in terms of section 27. It's a socio-economic right, which means that it must be progressively realized. More services must be provided to an increasing number of people over time. And when the department funds NPOs to provide services, they're assisting the DSD to fulfill its mandate. So I think we have to understand very clearly that when the department funds NGOs, they are not funding organizations as a favor or out of their generosity or because they want to support NGOs' hobbies. NGOs are assisting the department to provide rights to people. And so when DSD cuts or terminates fundings to NPOs, so when it shuts down a shelter for 6 months, because it's not municipally non-compliant, it is obliged to provide alternative services to the women who were in that shelter and and the future residents of that shelter who will now not get shelter because the shelter has been closed down. So if they shut down a service and they do not step in and replace the service offered by the NPO, then they are depriving service beneficiaries of their existing rights. And what we have here is regressive realization. So we have to think very carefully when the department says it doesn't have money and it's cutting budgets. What we are doing is engaging in the regressive realization of rights when that happens. And just very briefly, that's section 27, the right to healthcare services, sufficient water and food, social security, and the state must take reasonable measures. Section 28, children, every child has the right to basic healthcare services and social services. So those rights are there and they need to be offered and progressively realized. So now I think against that backdrop, we now need to look at budgets, because budgets are obviously how we make these rights real. And I think we have a major problem from the outset, which is that, to be honest, I'm not sure as a country we value social care services. There may be, to the extent that we should. And the reason I'm going to say that is if we look at the allocation of the budget to DSD in 2024-2025, this is not unusual. It's been the pattern for well over a decade now. And I think the way to understand the DSD's budget is to think of it in terms of a cash component and a care component. So the cash component refers to the grants that DSD pays, and the care is the services. So in 2024-25, DSD as a whole, that was both national and provinces, received a budget 387.3 billion. So it's a big budget. However, 355.2 billion was to be spent on grants, with a further 10 billion to be spent on policy oversight and grant administration. 22 billion then was to be shared between the 9 provinces. And that 22 billion is where the great majority of social care services, whether provided by government or NPOs, will come from. It's 6%. So I think the fact that only 6% of DSD's budget is going to services, regardless of who provides them, is already telling us that there's a problem, that income poverty is the only priority, and it's perhaps not recognizing the other kinds of poverty that people experience. So I think here's the first problem, is to be asking why it is that care services are not valued. Nobody's saying that cash should be reduced. Grants are very important, but the point is, how are we increasing care in order to be able to provide an adequate level of care to people? I want to show you this. It's unfortunately the most recent data I could find. It's from Treasury. It was for their study in 2018, looking at the outcome of the Nwongo judgment, which in 2014 had said that the Department of Social Development's policy on funding NPOs was unconstitutional, and they were required to take steps in order to make sure that the funding policy was constitutional. So in 2018, the study was done, and this is an analysis of the data that was available for 2016-17. This is expenditure on social welfare services per province then. In the middle column shows when you break those amounts down by the number of poor people in the province, this will you then get the amount that is spent per poor person in the province, per poor person in that particular province. So the average was 342 Rand per year per poor person. The provinces that were especially worrying was Limpopo, which was spending 220 Rand, which is 36% below the per capita spending. KwaZulu-Natal, 236 Rand, and Mpumalanga, 255, and the Eastern Cape, 307 Rand. The most generous spending came from Western Cape at 622 Rand per poor person, and Northern Cape at 577 Rand per poor person. So you can see how these disparities are playing out in provinces. And I want to just look at what this means following the Nwongo decision. So Treasury estimated that, so one of the things that the Nwongo decision said, in addition to the fact that the policy on funding NPOs was unconstitutional, was that the department was required to fund organizations' core costs, not their full costs, just their core costs. And so in trying to estimate what it was that organizations were being underpaid, the Treasury calculated that 9.2 billion in 2018 was required to fill the 71% funding gap in the level of transfers to existing NPO services, and 9.4 billion was required to equalize spending across provinces at the 2016 levels of spending, so that what was being spent in the Western Cape was being spent across the country. So you can see there is a very, very significant deficit in relation to NPO funding, as well as funding to social care services in the provinces generally. There has not been, and one does acknowledge the impact of the COVID pandemic and subsequent economic difficulties. There has not been any real attempt to, I think, try to plan progressively over the next couple of years as to how this is going to happen. So in this table here, what I've tried to do is give you a breakdown of what each province receives in terms of their budgets for their departments of social development. Gauteng, as you might note, gets 5.4 billion. It is the largest amount of money allocated to departments of social development in the country. That does not mean, as you saw from the previous slide, that Gauteng is the most generous province in the country. They get the largest amount because it has the largest population, and in terms of the provincial equitable share, provinces with larger populations will get more money. So Northern Cape, because it is a small population, gets the least amount of money. I think what's also important to look at is that you can also see that where decreases are happening in provinces. So Eastern Cape, Free State, and KwaZulu-Natal, despite the fact that Treasury has implemented austerity measures and has been on this process of fiscal consolidation and has frozen posts, you can see that nonetheless, Eastern Cape, Free State, and KwaZulu-Natal did attempt to increase their budgets to social development this year. This was not the case for Gauteng and Limpopo, and you'll see that actually Gauteng cut the budget this year by 223 million. There was also, and I think that comes off the back of the cut over the previous years. I mean, just to focus on Gauteng, is you can see that, and I'm basing this on a budget analysis I'm writing at the moment, that between 2021 and 2022, Gauteng's budget has grown very little, by about 1%. Now, that is a political decision, because at the same time as Gauteng's budget has increased by 1% over this period, the Gauteng Department of Community Safety, for example, their budget has increased by 154% and an amount of 1.4 billion. So this is where you can see how different political priorities impact upon the money that is made available to departments of social development in each province in order to be able to distribute to services. So here I'm looking at transfers and subsidies, and again, as I said, my apologies, this was based on the available information from the provincial treasuries, so it's not complete for all years. But you can see, again, and this is a reflection of the fact that that Gauteng has a large population and therefore a large number of NPOs. Just under 35% of its budget goes to NPO transfers. Western Cape has a higher percentage. Some 40% of their budget is going to NPOs. We then have followed by Free State, which gives 28% of its social development budget to non-profit organizations. So again, what this is telling us is that in each province, and this is explained by two things. One, it's the fact that they pay different amounts of subsidy. So in some provinces, if you're paying less for the same service than another province, you might be able to fund more organizations that way. That's one explanation for the differences. The other explanation for the differences is the extent to which the departments provide services versus NPOs. So you can see, and you'll see when I talk to the budget being spent on DSG staff, Eastern Cape transfers very little to the non-profit sector. And here we spoke earlier about the differences in subsidies. And I mentioned the fact that there is no consistency. So here you can see this very clearly. Here we contacted our contacts, those members of the Gauteng Care Crisis Committee who are national organizations, contacted their equivalents in other provinces, and we put together the table based on that information. We assume that the department does not discriminate between organizations and pays every social worker in an NPO the same. That's our assumption. It may be incorrect. So if we look at column 1, I want to draw your attention to the Eastern Cape. That SAW stands for Social Auxiliary Worker. That's the subsidy per month. That is 3,434 Rand per month. That is below the minimum wage, and that is a subsidy to somebody who actually has a qualification. It's deeply troubling that the subsidy is below the minimum wage. Free State, we could not determine what they pay their social workers, because in Free State their funding is not per post, it's per program. So it's left more or less the organization, when they get program funding, to decide how they will allocate it. Limpopo is the most generous in terms of its subsidies to social auxiliary workers. As you can see, it's 15,000 Rand per month, and it is extremely close to the DSD's payments at entry level for a grade 1 social auxiliary worker. Obviously, social auxiliary workers in government can earn much more once they start rising up the different grades and once they progress beyond entry level. But you can see that Limpopo at 15,000 is close to 15,234. If we move to social workers, so the subsidy, again, entry level at DSD, grade 1. So this is the least you can be paid in the department. The monthly salary is 25,687. It is considerably lower in the NPO sector. The largest subsidy is paid by the Western Cape, which pays 18,000. Sorry, Limpopo, which pays 19,482 Rand. So then one must make a comment about Limpopo. Is it pays people better than other provinces, even if it's not giving a lot of money. So I think these are some of the complexities that you're seeing in provinces. So they pay the most at 19,400, and then the Western Cape at 18,000, and Mpumalanga is also, I think, paying well at comparatively well at 16,000 per month. If we then look at the case manager or the senior social worker, the person who's responsible for supervision of social workers, at the entry level in DSD grade 1, it's 37.7 thousand Rand per month. The nearest approximation comes from Western Cape, where they're paying 27,407, allocating 27,347 Rand per month in a subsidy. The lowest is being paid by Eastern Cape at 18,524. So you can see there is very significant disparities between provinces in terms of what NPOs are receiving, as well as between the subsidies that are paid to NPOs. Nobody is suggesting necessarily that NPOs should be paid at exactly the same rate at the DSD, but I think a subsidy of 80% is probably much more realistic. And subsidy should also increase. Social workers who've been in an NPO for 10 years should not be receiving the equivalence of an entry-level grade 1 salary in the DSD. So here's another whole area of difficulty, and one of the difficulties it causes is that it causes significant staff turnover in NGOs. They're often leaving and trying to, because these salaries are low, they may be trying to obtain jobs in government in order to get these obviously better salaries. So here's another part of the problem that I think is contributing to the resourcing the difficulties that NPOs face. We do not have information, unfortunately, about non-professional staff. However, I was able to find a little bit, and I think one does want to acknowledge this effort made by Eastern Cape and Northern Cape. Even though the Eastern Cape subsidies to social auxiliary workers is below the minimum wage, and you could see the stipend I was talking about earlier to the childcare workers in their drop-in centres is also below minimum wage. They have this year, and that's part of where the increase in funding comes from, they have been trying to push up subsidies to minimum wage. And so has the Northern Cape in some of its older persons service centres. So we can see some progress, and we can see some departments, some provinces trying to make an effort. We do not see other provinces also trying to make sure that no subsidy is below the minimum wage, which I really think, given the levels of poverty in this country, the fact that everybody else has to pay minimum wage, I think that's the least the department could be doing, is paying a minimum subsidy that is equivalent to the minimum wage. I now want to just give you a look, because I think here is the other element as to what is putting strain on budgets. And here we need to look at the number of staff that is being employed by DSD and the cost of the staff. And so this becomes very important when you take into account the fact that Treasury has said they will no longer pay staff increases, that departments will have to find them from within their own budgets. So what that means is that some provinces, and KwaZulu-Natal is one example, have gone to find the increases for their staff from NPO subsidies. So you'll see the largest, the two provinces where services or the bulk of the budget is going to DSD staff is Eastern Cape at 69%. In Limpopo in 2023-24, 68% of the budget was being spent on staff. In Northwest, it was amounting to 64%. The amount start to in Gauteng, 40% of the budget is going to DSD staff, KZN 55%, Western Cape 45%, Northern Cape 49%. So again, you can see that the more staff you have and the more you have to pay their increases, the less money you're going to be able to have for NPO services, because the money has to be shared between the two. I want to just draw your attention to what is happening. So we'll take Eastern Cape, for example. In 2021, they were employing 4,362 people at a cost of 1.7 billion. In 2024-2025, they were employing fewer people, 4,292 people, but the cost was greater. They were spending just on 2 billion. So you can see what the increase is doing to the budget that's going to be available for services, because you have fewer people. Despite DSD spending so much of its budget on staff, it actually has fewer staff to deliver services, and its budget to NPOs is not increasing significantly. So you can see that services in the Eastern Cape are probably not increasing, and if anything, they are decreasing. Gauteng is also another example, 4,785 members of staff at a cost of 1.7 billion. I'm going to give you 2023-24 and then just comment on 2024-25. So a decrease to 4,747 in 2023-2024, but an increase in the budget to 2.2 billion. So when Gauteng says it's going to take over services, that's very concerning, because they're not showing the kind of staff increases that they need to. This year, they have said they will increase their staff to 5,421 at a cost of 2.2 billion. How they are managing to increase their staff quite significantly at a limited budget level tells you that the increases in numbers are probably at staff at lower level. This is not the reflection of an increase necessarily of social workers. So they are probably employing interns or people they send to youth brigades who are not necessarily able to provide services. So this becomes a source of very significant concern. So just to conclude, I mean, as I've tried to outline, provinces attach different political priorities to DSD funding. So while all were affected by austerity in 2024-25, only Gauteng and Limpopo decreased funding to NPOs, decreased funding to DSD as a province, as a department. But I do want to also note that while some provinces did get an increase, those increases were nominal. They were really, if you're taking inflation into account, they're really in name only. So we can see that what's happening at provinces shows that DSD is not necessarily a priority. NPO funding is not keeping pace with inflation, and it appears to be on the decline. based on available information. It said most notable in Gauteng, with 220, these are 223 million cut this year. However, NPO's targets are not decreasing. They're still expected to produce the same amount of work with less funding. So I think while the department says it's subsidizing NPOs, actually NPOs are subsidizing government, because as I'm going to come to now, and as NSM has already noted, there is a real difficulty in getting money from elsewhere. So organizations are persistently working for less, not at the true cost of the service. They're having to reduce and cut services. This is not a meaningful way to realize people's rights in terms of Section 27. Funding is not adequate to services, despite the 2014 Nwongo decision and the existence of the sector funding policy developed by National DSD. I think one really wants to acknowledge the work of National DSD, the time and the effort that they've put into developing the sector funding policy. It really has the potential to improve the situation, and one acknowledges their efforts. And I would strongly encourage that all members of the committee read this to understand how funding should be distributed. The problem, as has already been noted, is that some provinces don't actually know that the SFP exists or read it. They also apply the bits of it they like and ignore the bits of it that they don't like. So there is a serious problem there in terms of trying to get provinces to comply with the policy. We've already noted that subsidies in some provinces are routinely paid late. I mean, in Northwest in September was the first time some organizations were still, when organizations started being paid. We still have organizations in Gauteng that have not been paid. We also have a situation in Gauteng where the department promised money to what is called new organizations, got them to sign SLAs, then suddenly realized they didn't have enough money and have now not paid those organizations, have not told them if they are still going to fund them, and have left them in limbo. They promised to give them an answer by the end of July. They didn't do so. They promised by today to give another answer. We will see if this happens. This is in contravention of the court order that was obtained against the department. The other thing we also have to point out is that NPOs do not receive all full tranches, and KZN is a case in point. In the last year, and it seems that this is because the department ran out of money, they came to organizations in January and February of this year and asked them to please sign new SLAs for the remainder of the year, the last 3 months, or whatever it was, for less. How can you, when you've already signed one SLA, be asked to sign another one where that gives you less money? And organizations were bullied and threatened that if they did not sign that SLA, they were not going to get funding at all. So the question, and then so that is the situation in KwaZulu-Natal. It still continues, where it seems like what's happening is that they pay differently to other provinces. They pay in advance and arrears. But because they're not paying in advance at the start of each month, but they're paying in arrears, it means that some organizations are only receiving 3 tranches per year, not 4. And so the question we have to ask, and we can see this happening in other provinces, and it's also happened in Gauteng, organizations don't get all their money. Where is this money going? And then, as I've already noted, DSD staff numbers are either stagnating or decreasing at the same time as their costs are increasing. So when they say they're going to take over services, this is a problem. And I mean, I'm going to use the word cannibalization here in the economic sense of the word. When you talk about cannibalization in economics, what you refer to is when a new service is introduced that simply swallows up the previous service. It simply eats it up. And that is effectively what I think is happening when DSD says it's going to take over services. They are not trying to create new services which are needed and which would amount to the fulfillment of the progressive realization of rights. They're simply swallowing up existing NPO services. And as I said, because they have fewer staff numbers, it's debatable as to whether they can do so to the same extent. They do not have the shelters and the infrastructure, the cars and the like to simply take over those services tomorrow. And we also saw in Gauteng for the 2 months when organizations did not receive funding, not one single service was supported by the DSD. They did not provide food to shelters. They did nothing. So they are not able to take over services, and there needs to be very serious thought given and clear planning if that is their goal. They have, however, already stopped NPOs from providing adoption services in Gauteng, and are now attempting to try and stop them from providing foster care services as well, on the basis that they can provide these services themselves. We have not seen any kind of planning or costing that indicates this. I've spoken about the provinces not complying with the sector financing policy or applying its provisions selectively. They also do not observe the principles of administrative justice. So while NGOs may not be entitled to funding, they are entitled to the rights to fair administrative decision-making in terms of Section 33 of the Constitution. The fact that departments do not tell organizations if they're funding them or they're not funding them, that they cut funding without warning, without giving organizations to make plans in advance. Those are all examples of administrative injustices. There is no prior warning and consultation. I think as another example, as at August 2024, Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, in disregard of the sector financing policy, which states that every province, in the interests of transparency, and because we are talking about taxpayers' money, must publish a list of every organization they funded for the year, as well as the amount they funded. Both Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal have refused to make this list available. And when last I heard, there was some court action against Gauteng DSD in relation to that action. Limpopo is not particularly compliant in this regard either. We've spoken quite a bit about the developmental approach in assisting organizations to comply with municipal bylaws and the costs in particular. I mean, there's no help here. I'm going to give an example of a child and youth care centre which was based in the grounds of Califong Hospital in Gauteng. Califong Hospital's building plans were lost in the building when Munitoria building in Tshwane burnt down a number of years ago. You acquire building plans in order to obtain one of your certificates for municipal bylaws. They obviously could not produce, A, they were not their business plans, and B, they could not produce them because it was the hospital's business plans. The hospital could not provide the business plans. Nonetheless, the Gauteng department withdrew their funding. Nobody seems to be particularly bothered by the fact that patients continue to go to Califong Hospital every day in a building that is municipally non-compliant. But the CYCC funding was withdrawn, and at the end of last year they closed down because they could no longer fund. Another example, which also shows, I think, how arbitrary and irrational some of the decisions around municipal bylaw compliance can be, is in Johannesburg. Since April last year, there were 20 older person service centres in the Johannesburg region who were denied funding on the basis of municipal non-compliance. All 20 are based on municipal premises. The premises of the municipality are non-compliant, but the organisation was denied funding. No steps have been, the municipality has not made, as far as we can see, since to try and become compliant. We also have to add to this the fact that the National Lotteries Commission is not effectively distributing its funds to NPOs due to alleged corruption over multiple years. You've read all about this. There are also insufficient numbers of people to make decisions on allocations. And this, I think, is a really important role that the recommendation I'd like the committee to consider is that to possibly consider calling the Minister of Trade and Industry to ask if he could not please speed up the appointment of people who can make these distribution decisions, and what plan is being put in place to ensure that funding starts flowing to NPOs as rapidly as possible. I've mentioned the impacts of COVID-19 on the economy. We've already heard about South Africa being a middle-income country. I think, as has also been mentioned, and as somebody has reminded me, Gauteng, despite pleading poverty and saying it couldn't fund NPOs, nonetheless returned R500 million to Treasury at the end of the last financial year. We have no explanation why. We need to be very concerned with the shrinkage of services, because people's social circumstances have become, South Africa has become a much more difficult place to live in. We know what the unemployment figures are. They've been on the increase. We also know how crime and violence has increased. We also are aware of the fact that quite often, where crime and violence, these are the services that are intended to address crime and violence. Where you reduce services to children, for example, you're potentially setting up a long-term cycle of violence and victimization if you don't give them services to address what they're exposed to. So there's a strong sense that the need for services is actually increasing at this time. And so there's an urgent need to rethink the under-prioritization of services, not only of the need both of DSD and NPOs, but I think NPO services in particular. I mean, I think possibly something Treasury for this committee to think about, because you do have oversight over national committees. Possibly you could be talking to National Treasury around how do they ring fence in NPO funding so that it cannot be used to pay shortfalls in government budgets. How can it be decreased further? I think there's some questions around how can provinces be made more accountable to national DSD? And I think, can the committee call COGTA, Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, to discuss how to harmonize approaches to municipal bylaws, both within and across provinces? This is their competence. They can play an important role, and I think the committee could potentially precipitate this important engagement. So thank you very much. That is the overview. It is at high level, and I hope it did give you a bit of a macro level insight into what is happening to the funding to social care services and NPOs in particular. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Vetten, for your presentation, which has provided, at least from where I sit, a very useful backdrop for what the honourable members have called for in this meeting earlier today, and that is to meet with the various provinces, departments of social development in the persons of the MECs. This is not a good picture if everything that has been presented is to be taken as fact, as it was presented as such. But I am not going to take any more time, because we actually are literally 5 minutes out of the time that was allocated for this presentation, for which I thank you so much for all the work that you've done in putting together the information that you've put together to give us this picture. It is a picture that we need, especially at the beginning of the term. It is a picture that is going to shape, if you like, our work in as far as the funding of or the relationship of the department with its partners, the NPOs, but also the relationship that the department has with those who perform its statutory work to actually provide the services to the people that it was set up to provide. So the services are being provided, the department is doing its part, the provinces are doing their part, and everyone else is doing their part, because we live in a whole of society environment where everyone that can make a contribution towards changing the lives or lifting the lives of people who are poor and vulnerable should be allowed to do that. And that must be governed by a cohesive and harmonious relationship amongst those service providers. But honourable members, I am opening the floor to you for committee deliberations on the presentation that has just been made by Ms. Vetten. Honourable Nyai, I have noted your hand. Are there any other hands? Honorable Abrams, Honorable Mare, and that will be all. So if you, Ms. Vetten, if you could just, I really want to thank you for having pushed through this presentation with your throat experiencing those challenges that it was experiencing. I really hope that you can get help so that you can get better from the problem that you are having. And if I may please ask that you just take notes as the honorable members make their comments and questions, so that if possible, you can respond at a later stage. And in the meantime, I hope that you can get, even if it's some temporary help for your throat. But thank you so much for pushing through with the presentation. Honorable Nyai.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I thank all the presenter who raised a number of issues with respect to the court judgment in Gauteng and also all hosts of areas. But I want to say that it's also fair enough to that perhaps as the portfolio committee, we need to have a joint portfolio committee with health, because there are issues of health that have been raised with respect to building plans and business plans. And there are issues relating to even the previously shelters, but also I believe the human settlement also can play a role. But I must say that with respect to the Auditor General report, Auditor General of South Africa report in terms of distribution of funds, I think they've indicated that the biggest beneficiaries of the grant, either not only to the grant and funding to the NPO, the biggest is in KwaZulu-Natal. And yet the presenter here says Gauteng has been the biggest beneficiaries. I'm not contesting either of the two. I think it's important Gauteng must come and account and other MECs of the various provinces on the issues that have been raised with the respective areas of their mandate. They must come and account against this allegation or this presentation. And I think we must highlight the NGO, NPO for coming out to the portfolio committee and raise all these issues. But it's important that the respective MEC and department come and account on those issues that has been raised. That is the first recommendation. And also I received I was attending the what called the NGO in Tembisa there, of the people with disability who had some challenges, but in the main, the money there with respect to their NGO or NPO, the money has been handled by the what called the administrator, who received a lot of money in terms of salary and administrative fee. So in this regard, Honorable Chair, I must also call for the Competition Commission to look into the social inquiry with respect to the issues relating to NGOs and the challenges raised by the presenter. The third issue that I want to put forward, Honorable Chair, is that these issues that have been raised, we must follow through them by making sure that also the portfolio committee receive some report in response to these issues by the DSD ultimately and all its agencies. When I'm saying all its agencies, including the NDA, not necessarily DSD, and as well as SAS, but also the the NDA because they also contribute to support some NGO in this regard. But also issues of Gauteng, we have made commitment as this portfolio committee to go and conduct oversight. And I'm sure this will be the basis and resource, the presentation we receive is a resource document as we are going to engage Gauteng through oversight in number of areas as well. And I'm sure broadly because there's been an outcry in Gauteng with respect to issues of the NGO not receiving their funding. So Gauteng would have to reply to these issues. And we know that there's been dramatic changes in the executive in Gauteng with respect to the MEC that was overseeing the NGO. And they have to explain to why, if they would want to make the NGO sign the second service level agreement with reduced some funding. Issues of the austerity measure also arises from the National Treasury. Treasury, for instance, if you look at the budget for this term, this period, they've reduced this by 445 million. And I'm sure these issues must also go beyond to issues of the austerity that have been raised, meaning that the Treasury must also be called upon to engage them on the issues of massive budget cut, which impact negatively on the NGO, because they are helping us to resolve a lot of challenges within society that government by themselves and ourselves as the people could not do. The partnership between the NGO, despite they must be listened to, and they must clear-cut response on the issues that affect them. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Munyai, for your comments and questions. I will hand over to Honorable Abrams.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to Ms. Vetten for the presentation. I think this must be the first time that I actually have no questions, because I have the presentation was so well presented, and it covered so much, and it's actually given me quite a bit to go back and to think about. So thank you very much for the comprehensive question. Chairperson, I echo your sentiments and the colleague before about, engaging provinces. And, some might ask why we as the National Assembly need to do deep dives into the provinces. And that's because we, at the end of the day, pass the budget. I mean, today it's the medium-term budget, and it's the vulnerable people who eventually come to us who are suffering because there are no services and they don't have access. And, Parliament and this committee can never be found wanting when it comes to vulnerable citizens, because we have a duty to uphold, the Constitution. And, while our colleagues, our, members, our counterparts in the legislatures, they might, have a better understanding of the province's need, as for the reasons I highlighted before, we also need to have the same understanding of provinces and their needs and where the gaps are. So, thank you again. I feel I, for one, have been greatly enriched by the content. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Abrams, for that complimentary comment, which I believe we all echo. Honorable Murray.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, I want to agree with what the previous speakers were saying, is that I've listened to this presentation, I've seen it, but when you listen to the presentation, it is such a well-presented presentation. I want to agree with my fellow members, is that we need to have a comprehensive meeting with all the different legislatures in the Department of Social Development so that we can understand what is happening there, and that we need to speak to the different departments, different MECs to understand what is going on. Because now, it's like through what Alexandra was saying, I don't even have a question because I've listened and my mind was just running all over. So I think there must be a meeting that we come together, MECs, legislatures, so that we can be on the same part of what is really happening in the different legislatures and MECs offices. Because we have listened to what the presenter was saying. It is a very detailed one, but we need to understand what is really going on in the different provinces. So I don't have questions. My mind is just running everywhere. I'm trying to get all this information in. But our main task as a portfolio committee is to make sure that the poorest of the poor is catered for, that what is happening at the very moment where more people are getting unemployed, more people losing their jobs, more people are going to become poorer, the living cost of living is so high. We cannot stand by and and see that things are happening and we're not doing it. Very happy that we had these discussions today and that we as a portfolio is going to come say what are we going to do next. So I want to thank you, Chairperson, for the proactive steps that you have been taken to make sure that these people come and represent in our portfolio. Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone that came to represent their things today. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, honorable members. I just need to check. The Honorable Reverend Kwabaza said that he can't raise his hand using his device. And I don't think I can see him on this platform because we are going towards the closure of the meeting. I do not want to leave any honorable member behind. In the absence of any indication from Honorable Kwabaza, I just want to reiterate the comments that have been made by the portfolio committee members, in that I cannot agree more. From the comments that were made by the Honorable Munyai to the Honorable Abrams and Honorable Mare, that this and what I actually said, that this presentation has given us a very, very useful backdrop for our engagements with the Department of Social Development, both nationally and with the provinces, as a recommendation has been sharply made for us to have a meeting with the MECs for social development. So this provides us with a very good, framework within which to ask probing questions and to seek clarity. And especially when it comes to where Ms. Vetten said that the increase or the decrease in services going towards the services is accompanied by in my understanding, there is no increase in the services being rendered, although the budgets may be increasing, and also there is no increase in the number of people that will be rendering these services. So that is a concerning sort of picture, if that is what I understood is true. And so, but all is not lost, because obviously we agreed some time ago. It's just that our program has been overtaken by other priorities that we've had to put in, but we are definitely going to be meeting or extending invitations to meet with especially the MEC for Social Development in Gauteng, and then at a later stage, but soon, the MECs for all the other provinces of MECs of social development in those provinces. So honorable members and ladies and gentlemen, I wish to thank you so much for today, for the whole meeting, from when Dr. Dango and her team presented and painted another very concerning picture when it comes to shelters and the challenges they are facing there. And what for me stood out even more as a downlight is that Dr. Dango was saying that in her view, the needle is not moving in the right direction. We don't seem to be even going towards the direction of winning the war against gender-based violence. So we have our work cut out, us as the portfolio committee, as we engage with the department in our quest to exercise oversight to ensure that at the end, in the final analysis, the people on whose behalf we are here are getting the services with the budgets that we approve here in Parliament, and that those services are rendered by people who are equipped to render those services, and not have a situation where you hear of workers, people who provide such a critical service in shelters, don't get their salaries. And if they do get their salaries are not up to scratch. So we have our work cut out, colleagues. And I just cannot thank our presenters for today for the presentations they've made and the level of sort of clarity and the picture they have painted for us as we gear ourselves to go out and do our work as in this term. So thank you all so much. I wish you all to travel. Those who I guess we are on a virtual platform, so there's no traveling involved. But I wish you all a blessed day going forward in the week, and that we see you on the ground or when you come and visit us again. But thank you also to honorable members. I guess you will be preparing yourself for the sitting this afternoon, but this meeting is officially adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Stay blessed.
Thank you, Chairperson.